Question 7. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learned in the progression from it to the full product? Well, I think there's a lot of things that I've learned from the preliminary task to the final product that we managed to create. And well, let's take a look at the preliminary task first, and I'll go through step by step what we've learned and improved. Straight away here, it's an establishing shot, and I think this is a very effective establishing shot because it has helped to create what we wanted from the atmosphere to our piece, and I think it was very effective in our preliminary task, this establishing shot, because it showed exactly what we wanted and where we were. And I think we tried to transfer this into our opening sequence. If you remember the shot, if we hold on 1 second, to this shot that we used over here, I think this was a similar establishing shot, and it doesn't seem that good, but this is basically we made this shot using inspiration from our preliminary task, because that was very effective, that establishing shot. I think the timing of that was fantastic, and I think this establishing shot, it didn't establish the setting, but we thought it's important. I think it's quite good to take this shot in the car, and it would help establish the character's voice, and this was another one that we used. So in terms of what we've learned from our preliminary task, I think it was very good that we had the establishing shot so perfectly executed in our preliminary task, so we could transfer it into our opening sequence. Okay, now if we switch back to that, so the establishing shot is very effective. That's one thing that we managed to transfer into our opening sequence, but if we look at the rest of this, I think this bit of continuity editing was a bit tacky. I don't think we really pulled it off. I think this is another thing we transferred into our opening sequence. Well, the editing was a bit better. We learned a lot. And there you can tell it's a cut. There's difference in sound, and it just looks a bit tacky. But I think we even rectified this afterwards, because this is fantastic continuity editing from these seconds here. I think that's very good continuity. I think we achieved that perfectly. But already you can see that we've used lots of shots here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've used 6 shots in 16 seconds, and the speed at which we were cutting here, I think that was something that we definitely used in our final product, because it's something that we wanted to achieve: fast, quick changes in the camera and edit it in such a way to make the atmosphere very quick. And you can, just by watching this, you can feel that it's quite a quick piece. You don't really know what's going on, but there's definitely a fast feel to it. And you can tell he's a bit worried, actually. You can tell quite a lot about what's going on. You can tell he's definitely worried, this character, or he's looking for something's happened, he's chasing her. You know, you do get those questions in your head, and the range of shots does it, but this is very poor. I think this is something that we've learned. We learned a lot about this, or with this mistake here. You can just tell it's a very poor bit of editing. They continued editing it from that shot to the over the shoulder shot. Very, very, very poor editing. And what we learned from here is that the reason why it's such poor editing was because we didn't do the takes in the right way. In this recording, this recording was the only one that we could use because it matched the recordings that we've taken from the other angles to get the other shots. And I think that's quite an important bit of that was quite an important lesson to learn, actually, that you can't you can't take any chances, and you should record it exactly the same way every single take that you do. We didn't do that, and because I ended up opening the door with my other hand, and some of them the chair was in the wrong place, my foot was in a different place, so this was the only take we could use, unfortunately, and it definitely did cost us because it looks quite very tacky. But just another point here on the mise en scene. I think we've achieved fantastic things with the mise en scene in the preliminary exercise. The chairs are scattered, tables scattered. The costume, the lighting. I mean, the grey lighting and colour was definitely a deliberate choice. This black and white feel to it, a bit dull. It's to make it a bit dim to fit in with the context of what's going on to create that animosity before you get to the joke at the end. And yeah, the costume quite dark again, quite sinister. There's quite a sinister feel to about this, quite dark. I think the mise en scene we did really well. The use of props and setting, the setting of an old school type building. You could definitely see it. There's something worrying about it. It does incite the audience to feel a bit worried or something's happening, some sort of action, negative action, quite negative connotations to all of these things. The dark costume, etc., etc. And here's another aspect of the mise en scene: the facial expression. Uh, Definitely portrays some worry, and I just think this passage of the preliminary exercise was very good and very bad. If we carry on just watching it, it establishes character. We hear the character speak for the first time. In that sense, this is quite very well done in the preliminary task. We managed to create character in a number of ways. Like we saw before this, we knew how he ran. We could make some fair estimations about the character. In fact, we saw it from his point of view, or we saw what he was doing anyway. He had 100% of the camera time, and we learn a bit more about the character after that. But in the second, we establish him and certain aspects of the mise en scene here. This just makes it a bit. This adds to the narrative because there's a clock here. Don't know what for. There's a battery lying around. There's a wire around his neck. He's wearing dark clothes. He's looking quite pale, as we'll see in the close-up a bit later. But then you see his reaction to him. So they establish a relationship between the two characters. I think this is what our preliminary exercise does really well. Is it establishes things fantastically thanks to the mise en scene I've just explained. But also just to by virtue of the actual narrative itself, I think it is quite engaging, the narrative, because of aspects of the mise en scene. The sound isn't great, the dialogue is quite poor, and I think we learned from that, the poor dialogue, and we decided not to use dialogue as the main bit of our opening sequence, but rather we chose to use a soundtrack because we thought that would be much better because this dialogue sounded very tacky. And the choice of shot here, this is brilliant. Close up on his face, but we also see new things about him. A prop on his arm, or if you want to call that costume, bracelet. Again, the clock, don't know what time it's telling, the pale face, the facial expression, wearing a hoodie. We learn a lot about this character. We can definitely uh, try and make educated guesses about what the character might be. Is he distressed? Has he done it to himself? What's going on? So at this moment it's quite tense. I think up till now the cuts have been quite quick between the shots. There's been quite a lot of fast interchange between the shots. This is the first time where for about 2 or 3 seconds I think it brings an end to this atmosphere that was created. For 2 or 3 seconds we see a disruption in that quick fast changing shot, and we see the same shot for a long time, close up, and then it returns to that shot. So for the last about 5 or 6 seconds it's literally one shot for most all but one of them. and that is of course for the joke. So from filming the preliminary exercise, I think there's a lot that can be learned, and there's a lot that we did learn, but it's important to remember that our opening sequence is quite different to what our preliminary was like, for in some ways better and in some ways worse. Uh, I think this shot is an example of how. No, so this shot is quite a good example of something that we've used from our preliminary exercise. We've learnt from it and applied it to our one. It was quite the way we showed the mise en scene, that medium close up, that showed the wire around his neck, the battery and the clock, as well as him. We could establish things about him. I think we used that and we applied it into this one where it's a close up, medium close up of his hand, but you can also see the props in the background, the alcohol. He's rolling up a cigarette, to establish his character. It represents teenagers, the conventional way, their facets of their character, of their characters, drinking, rebellious, fun-loving, etc., etc. I've mentioned those in the other answers, but there was a lot to be learned. I think our preliminary task achieved quite a lot, and I think we did apply it into our uh, uh, final product quite well. I think we've applied all the good that we could have. Maybe not in the best way, but we definitely applied all the good that we could have into our final product.